Good morning, and how are you today? Today I have a legislator with me who's our running mate in Middlebury. Middlebury has two legislators, and Amy and I are the two. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
How did the snow work today?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm ready for winter.
Yeah, ready for skiing.
I'm ready for skiing. I hope to go this afternoon.
Yeah, I think that skiing and all the business is really important in the state of Vermont.
Yes, it's huge.
So when we just talked about budgeting, we need the budget of the skiing.
That's right.
I see the snowdrops coming down. I said, well, there comes another $1
Right.
from room and board and skiing taxes and stuff. Yeah, so, and they buy other things. So I thought maybe today we might talk about our good time we had last Saturday with the Chief Justice Reiber, and we had all the legislators, about 7 or 8 of us there.
Yes, just about the whole caucus from Madison County was a breakfast at Rosie's, 7:30,
Yeah.
bright and early last
Saturday. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so that's how we spend our weekends.
It's true. This Saturday I had a coffee hour at Carol's.
Uh-huh. How did that go?
It went well. People came, they asked questions, and
They did.
we had some good conversations.
Yeah. So let's. We had a good time with the Chief Justice, and he talked to us about problems he had, and he wanted us to talk about problems we might have, and spending licenses. What they have is too many people coming in, not enough judges to take the time.
That's right. Although we did also learn that I think 8 new judges were appointed in the last 6 months, and that's helping.
Yeah, because people retire, and then they left the space empty.
But
So-
it took some time to refill them, and now
Yeah.
I think that they're filled now.
Yeah, I think there might be one more somewhere.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but there might be. But that helps get rid of the backlog a little bit.
A little bit. He also mentioned that one of the things slowing the courts down right now is that folks are representing themselves, pro se representation, and that takes longer to work through the system. And I thought his perspective on it was pretty interesting, because he wasn't down on it. He was trying to figure out how he could help people do that in a more efficient manner, and he recognized that that's sort of a bigger picture trend in our culture, and that it's worked in, I think he said, in the civil, in the lower courts, it has worked out that they were able to educate people how to better represent themselves, and he's looking for ways to do that in the other courts as well.
I think, yes, I think that what people need is, what do I do? What do I file? What do I need to file? How do I answer? And how do I get papers served? What that means. And years and years and years ago, I had a woman who was in the court and so forth, and but there was nothing coming up or being done. All of a sudden, I got a phone call saying, your client is being gone after by the police because she hasn't shown up at court. I said, what do you mean show up at court? The sheriff never delivered the notice of the court, and they found it in the trunk along with a lot of other things that had not been served. So that particular sheriff lost his job.
Yeah, he's doing his job.
So he's not there now. This was years, this was probably 30 years ago, but I still remember that. So it's important for people to keep on top of it. Did the person receive it? Do I have to answer it? How do I have depositions? How do I do that too? And we gave back, remember, we gave back some information to him.
That's right. We did talk about driving with suspended license, and I remember that Willem's working on a bill to address that.
Yeah, I'm in his committee. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in his committee. I think he sponsored the bill.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And then I actually remember I learned that Montana was doing an interesting thing by, instead of suspending your license, they were actually revoking your ability to drink alcohol and I think we heard it was working. So, and Willem said your bill is doing something similar. Have you heard? Has your bill been introduced to your committee? Do you know how?
Well, we started working on it before it was introduced.
Okay, so what's the mechanism that's going to help deter people from drinking while driving, but also keep them having the ability to get to work?
We didn't speak on that too much. We haven't done that too much, but we talked about what happened in Chittenden County, where they reduced all of the fines. To each suspension that you had was $20. People came, 1,200 and some odd people came in. And the total amount of money was over $100,000. I forget the exact number, $148,000.
That was collected, or
that was collected from $20. So you know, there were a lot of. It averaged out something like 6 per person, but one person had 54 or something like that.
Well, it kind of gets to the question of, is that person safe on the roads?
Well, the suspensions on are two kinds. All right, if you drive through, these were only suspensions that in civil, no DUIs or other kinds of suspensions. Only if you went through a stop sign and you got a ticket, or you went through a red light and you got a ticket, or you speeded, maybe safely, but you speeded, you know, it's only 50 and you're doing 75, you get a ticket, and then you get your license suspended. Then you can't get to work because you have a suspended license, and so you're driving on a suspended license, you get a second one. And then you drive on the 2 suspended license, you have a third one. It's because you have to get to work, you have to feed your family. So the problem was that what they did was these people cried in happiness. They were so happy this was happening, and they could pay off and get these licenses off their backs. Of course, they lost, their suspensions off their back, because they've also lost their license in some cases, so they had to go after that too. So we talked about that. I don't think that many people in the committee wants to do it around the state, but I would like it to happen, just to get, because when they go to court, every time they go to court for each one of these suspensions, it's court time. You know, it's their time and it's court time.
Right.
And it's staff time. So this reduces the work, because the actual work of all the suspension of all these 1,000 people, that's a lot of work. But when it's done, and of course, in a shape. So anyway, so Ray was talking about that a little bit, and that's what we're doing.
Right. And he talked about opiates.
Oh, yes.
And the ramifications in the court system, which are also big and taking up a lot of time and energy and resources in the court system.
Yeah, it's taking up, families taking their children away. They're taking the children away from their parents because the parents aren't taking care of the children.
Right.
Yeah, so it's hard. One person was shot to have done that, and they're frightened.
Yeah.
But you can't leave a child there who doesn't get food, doesn't get enough warm clothes on, doesn't get showered. That's it. So now let's get back to something on your committee.
In our committee, we're talking a lot about results-based accountability, which is the new way that the Appropriations Committee is asking all of the sort of topic committees. So I'm on the Fish, Wildlife, and Water Committee, and our agency of jurisdiction agencies is the Agency of Natural Resources primarily, and we deal with Department of Environmental Conservation, Forest Parks and Recreation, and Fish and Wildlife. So those are the agencies and that we have jurisdiction over. And so we've spent some time in the first couple weeks of the session hearing from the secretaries of each of those agencies. Well, it's the Agency of Natural Resources, and so they're the departments within the agency. So we've heard from the 3 department commissioners about how they have already instituted results-based accountability. And Diane talked a little bit in the previous interview about there are 9 population level goals that the legislature set out, and they're big picture things, like Vermont has a prosperous economy is number one, and number three is a healthy environment. And so we are looking at what are the indicators that are in both the legislation, but that also each of the departments is already tracking. And we're asking the kind of, what is it that Vermonters expect of each of these departments? And do these indicators reflect over time, if we track them, will they tell us how each department's doing around the things that are most important to Vermonters? And I think the part of it that I've taken on personally is that we last year got a report on forest fragmentation in the state of Vermont, essentially like a big picture view of the state of Vermont's forests. And what I realized in doing results-based accountability is the health of our forests is not included in that at all. But when you think about Vermont's economy, $1.4 billion of our economy is generated just from timber industry alone. So timber and related forest products industry generates 1.4 billion. Plus, there's an addition in our economy of tourism related, recreation related, foliage visits, things that the forest gives us. So these are the direct ways that healthy forests support our economy, and I would like to add those into the Vermont has a healthy, prosperous economy piece of it.
Do they also do tourism and walking and so forth in the forest?
Yes, so the
State forests or?
all forests actually. So we're looking at all forests. Most of Vermont's forests are privately owned and open to recreation unless posted otherwise. So, and whether or not they're open or closed, they're certainly part of our foliage experience. People can view trees without accessing private land, and so the health of our forests are important for those reasons. And interestingly, when you looked over at the indicators under the environment, there weren't any officially listed anyway under Vermont has a healthy environment. And I think when you think about it, the things that the forest gives us, I mean, there are just many. I think of the forest as our big insurance policy. It provides resilience. The forest mitigates climate change through sequestration of carbon. It also mitigates carbon change through water, storage of water during large flood events. Provides wildlife habitat in addition to all those other benefits that we get to the economy. So we're making sure we add those into the big picture population goals. The 9 that started out, we're adding more under the forests, and then we're also going to add into the specific indicators that we track. One of the things that people may not be aware of is that Vermont has had, since we've been keeping track, which is about 2 decades now, 75% of our landscape has been covered by trees. We call that forest cover. But what this report we received last year told us was that for the first time since we've been keeping track, we're seeing a loss in forested cover. And for me, when I think about the forest being that big picture insurance policy for us in terms of clean air, clean water, and climate change mitigation, we need to be really careful when we find out that we're seeing a loss in forest cover.
Yeah, I think 75% of the trees, land is trees.
Yes. It's down now,
it's down now. Yeah. That's hard because there's also the issue of hunting that people like to do, whether it's hunting foxes or deer or whatever. That's another issue on the farm, hunting in the trees, and it's another money builder.
Right, people do come to hunt. And actually, of the agency, in the Agency of Natural Resources, many of our programs are covered by fees from things like license fees and other things. So
camping fees.
Camping at state parks. Our state parks run themselves. I mean, it's 90% paid for through funds generated both for camping fees and user fees, and then also timber sales and other ways of generating funds. So very small amount of that budget comes from the general fund.
I think that also there's some cutting of trees on state land, but I think it's very carefully watched.
It's carefully managed, but it's an
Managed.
important part of the income, but it's also a really important way to manage the forest
Yeah.
and keep openings for people who want to hunt. You know, wildlife requires different stages of the forest succession. So when you cut the trees, different types of plants fill in, and people can enjoy different types of hunting, and wildlife needs it to reproduce and to succeed. So you want to manage your forest wisely, and we're doing that at the state, in our state lands.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, if I remember correctly, the state owns 66 million acres or something like that. I forget the number, but
That sounds a little high, but
yeah, it might be a little high, but we do own a lot of acreage of land, and we have to make sure that some of them have, some of it was gifts. And when they gave the gift, they said they could only be used and kept as a forest.
Sure.
And we have to follow that. We can't just say, okay, we can sell this piece of land and we can sell that piece of land. We don't need it.
Right.
But I think we need trees.
We definitely need trees, and we need, you know, in order for our forests to provide good opportunities for the forest products industry, they need to be large tracts of forested land, not small pieces spread all around. And then the other thing that those large forest tracts are good for are wildlife. And so one of the things that's come to my attention is that right now, during a period of pretty slow growth, we're still seeing a reduction in the overall amount of forested land, and that's because of development. People are, you know, for housing and also commercial developments are encroaching. So one of the things that I've been working on is the development of workforce housing within our identified growth areas. There's a lot of hurdles for people to build homes, say in in the village of Middlebury and other villages that are ready for housing to be built, and people want to live in town. They want to be able to walk to work and walk to their grocery store.
Yes.
And if we can open up opportunities for workforce housing in our villages, we can also take pressure off the outlying areas and maintain those areas for working forest lands and all the other benefits that the forest gives us. So I've been working with actually a representative from Norwich on just talking about right now for ideas. Are there things that we can be doing at the legislative level to make it more affordable, more accessible for not affordable housing, I call it workforce housing. So people who make $75,000 a year for the household or $100,000 a year, how do we make housing that they can afford available in our villages?
Yeah, it's very important.
We've done a great job with affordable housing, sort of the lower income. We have a lot of that in Middlebury, but we definitely, you know, almost every business owner I talk to, and they say, oh, we need workforce housing. And I certainly know that. It was hard for us to buy a house when we came back from Oregon. It's hard to find an affordable house even when you make an okay income in Vermont.
Yes, and I was going to say something else now.
It'll come back.
So we maybe we should talk about the water update. You passed a bill last year. Can you briefly discuss what's in the bill so people are reminded of what we did?
Sure. We passed.
That was your committee.
That was out of our committee. It started in our committee. Although what's very interesting, and you know, a bill leaves your committee, and you're like, "That's great, we love it," and then it comes back, and you're like, "We didn't do that." Who did that?
Well, it went to about 5 different committees.
There were a number of committees of jurisdiction just on our side, and then it has to go to the Senate side.
Yeah.
So the goal of the bill is to clean up the waters of the state of Vermont, and it has the long view in mind for sure, 20-year trajectory with an imperative. There are sections of, in particular, Lake Champlain that are literally suffocating from phosphorus pollution runoff. It's been happening for decades.
Yes.
We got some interesting testimony in our committee on how and why. One of the most fascinating things I learned was from Bordeaux Brothers, which has a branch here in Middlebury. They sell fertilizer and feed, and they came in and testified and told us that post-World War II, the government was actually afraid they weren't going to be able to feed the population. They anticipated the boom coming. They were so they set a policy of just put phosphorus on everything. They told farmers, they brought it up by the train cart full. They said feed it, put it in your barns, use it on your fields. And so some of the phosphorus that's in the lake today is that residual that's come from decades, literally decades of trying to kind of amp up and get ready to feed this burgeoning population. And then, of course, some of it is from today's runoff as well. So we've inherited the problem. Current practices in some ways, in some farms, we're not making it any better. But the goal of the bill is to work with all land users, not just the farmers. The farms are, through the
Right.
modeling, they account for about 40%. But another significant portion comes from developed lands, and my backyard and your backyard, and
People put so much chemicals on their lawns to make it look without a weed.
people can
We
do
never
that.
did that. We just let the
No.
weeds grow.
Yeah.
They were green. We mowed them.
Yeah, and we do the same thing. But we also all like the roads, and the roads themselves can pollute with sediment, but they can also provide sort of a trajectory, a quick way for runoff from other land uses to get into our waterways and deliver it directly. So the idea of the bill is a sort of all in, everybody needs to do their part. However big or small your part is, you need to clean up your act, whether it's your own backyard or you're a 1,000-acre farmer or a municipality with roads. You need to manage so that the water has a chance to settle and filter, infiltrate before it gets into our surface waters and pollutes them. And we did that. We funded it with a portion of the property transfer tax, and we've been getting updates from the agency, both agencies, agriculture and natural resources, in the first few days of the session. And things are going pretty well. There's an amendment or a proposed change to the bill to put back in. There's a Clean Water Fund Board, which is established. Their mission is to oversee the Clean Water Fund and give big picture direction on where priorities should be. I guess I should also mention that the first, we were looking for a long-term source of funding that was related to land use, but that became very complicated very quickly. So the first 3 years of the funding are going to come from this 0.5 cent on the property transfer tax, and then in the following out years, it's the hope of the legislature that the funding is tied more directly to land and land use. So some sort of tax or that's related to your property ownership.
So does it? They need the money to. Can you get rid of any of this stuff in the lake?
Absolutely. Oh, once it's in the lake, there are people working on that. But what the focus of the bill is to prevent more from getting in.
Yeah.
And there are multiple ways that people can do that. Primarily, like I said, if you can manage the runoff from your own property, whether you're a farmer or a homeowner or anything in between, a commercial property owner, if you find ways for runoff that's leaving your property to settle and infiltrate into the ground before it enters the waters of the state. So, stormwater treatment ponds, you see those around developments. That's one way developers can do it on commercial properties. Rain gardens are getting quite popular. There's a beautiful one at Marble Works, and they just added another one.
Yeah, they just put another one on. Yeah.
So in that case, you're taking the runoff from the parking lot and directing it into a beautiful garden and just letting it settle through the soils before the water gets into the Otter Creek.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what everybody needs to do. So whether you're a farmer with 500 cows, you need to keep your cows out of the water. You need to spread manure at the right time of the year and in the right way. We're learning a lot about how to spread manure in a better way.
Yes, there is.
So it's basically managing, if it's clean when it gets off your property. That's the goal, is for all of us to have clean surface water. And I know the towns are nervous about it. But our goal in these first 3 years, again, is to help the towns get up to speed on what their problems really are and then how to manage for them.
Well, the problem with the people who have little lawns or big lawns, and they put all these chemicals on it to make it look better, I don't think they realize that the water carries, the rain carries that into the dry road. The road then carries that to the sewer plant, and the sewer plant cannot get the nutrients out and the phosphorus out because the chemicals all have phosphorus in it. So, in fact, what people need to realize is when I do all of this stuff, it is going into the water.
It's going
and
into
it's
the water.
hurting the fish and fishing, and it's improving the weeds.
Yeah, the algae blooms make it unswimmable and in some cases
Yeah.
poisonous.
Yeah.
It's a problem. I think, though, it's also important to realize that the other side of our state has issues with nitrogen. And so the bill is not exclusive to the Champlain Valley. It's definitely a statewide, it's a statewide focus.
So you're talking about the Connecticut River
Yes, the Connecticut
and
River
everything that
watershed.
leads to it.
Right. So
Yeah.
they have water pollution of a different type around nitrogen, but similar solutions will be necessary.
Uh-huh.
So the bill is definitely a statewide focus. The EPA motivated the focus. I mean, the EPA plus the fact that we realized that our lake is in bad shape, so we needed to do something as well. Those two things together helped motivate and give energy behind the water bill last year.
That was the one of the biggest bills
Yeah.
outside of the budgets, most important bills that came out of the legislature last year.
Yeah, and it's super exciting for me to get to work on it in my first year in the legislature.
Yeah.
Considering that's what I do professionally is work on
Water.
and conversation issues. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was really interesting to me to be there for a policy discussion that I fully understood from the implementation side, but have to learn about the legislative process while I was doing that. So
Yeah.
it was a challenge, but it was exciting, and I really enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
I remember it came to so many committees to look into that.
It had to go to us. It had
yeah.
to go to agriculture and forest products. It had to go to Ways and Means because
Yep.
we proposed a way to pay for it. And I guess what
It was Commerce too, wasn't it? Did it go to Commerce?
I don't think it went to Commerce. I'm not sure who else it went to in the House, but that was enough. And I think one thing, did I mention that we're looking at adding, so the Clean Water Fund Board is we originally started with 6 members of the general public being on it, and then it got winnowed down to being the agency heads. The administrators responsible for it was the thinking behind it, but members of our committee have introduced a bill to add back in 6 members of the public because they really feel like
Yes.
that's an important part of transparency and accountability to have those folks there.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that bill gets any airtime. Hopefully it will.
I'm just
hit the
going. We've
floor.
got about a minute left, and I'm putting in a bill. It just came out Friday. That chickens.
Oh yeah, what's your chicken bill?
It's to allow people who have a half acre of land to have 5 chickens. Now they're hens, not roosters. You can't have the roosters. Laying hens, and they can they can fence. They have to fence their yard or whatever
Contain
area.
the chickens.
Yeah, whatever area they want. Whether it's just a house in a small fenced-in place, so that anybody could do that. But it wouldn't affect towns if they didn't want that in their town. It would just be for people who really wanted it.
Can't anyone do that now?
In Middlebury, they can.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
remember because I fought for that.
yeah, yeah. But not every town has it.
No.
Not every town will allow it.
Yep.
Some towns will allow it. So, okay. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
thank
having
you
me.
for watching. Bye-bye.